crisis as the organisational development manager for the retail bank. That was all about leading in a crisis. We decided to raise our kids here in Napier, as I said, so in 2009 I moved back here. Since I've been here, I've built my own business in consulting, which is also doing leadership consulting to large firms. The sorts of companies that I've worked for would be companies like Fonterra, Fletcher, New Zealand Post and a range like that. And so the experience that I've got from that really is around working with senior leaders, leaning into difficult challenges to get stuff done. And so the reason I'm asking you for your candidate vote is because I think that I've got the experience that Napier needs in its next MP.
Thank you for that, you two. Right, so I'm just going to give a brief overview of how tonight's going to run. And so first of all, we've been asked a couple of questions around why it's just the two candidates. And when we were thinking about coming up with this, there was already multiple debates that had all of the candidates available. And in those, because there's so many people, you can't really get a good deep dive around who the candidates are. So tonight is a conversation between the two major party candidates, and hopefully to get more of a flavour of who they are as a person. So some ground rules, you two. We're up for constructive criticism of other people's thoughts, so we'll give you some space to rebut each other. Ideally, no interjecting or interrupting others unless they really misrepresent your own view or your party's view. I'm not up for party slander or personal slander. And for that goes for online too. So if you've got some questions or some constructive criticism to feed into the debate, we'd love to hear what you say. But if you're like throwing out there just insults or any hate, we're not going to stand for it and we're just going to delete it straight away. So from here, we're going to move into some fun quick fires, and then we'll move into some more serious questions and a slightly more deeper conversation around things like climate change, healthcare, the learnings from Cyclone Gabriel, reforms and what our plans are for the future. And we're hoping to weave in your questions from online. So as you think of stuff, feel free to throw them in. We've got a team that's helping them feed into me, and I'll do my best to bring them through the debate. Rightio, quick fire. Are we ready? I'm going to call out an either-either, and you just call out your response. Start with an easy one. Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Coffee.
Early bird or night owl?
Oh, night owl.
Night owl.
Napier or Hastings?
Napier.
Napier.
No one said Hastings.
Depends if it's the district or the city.
Beach or mountains?
Oh, beach.
Beach.
Sports or the arts?
Oh, the arts.
Oh, arts, probably.
Netflix or books?
Books.
Netflix at the moment.
There you go. National or Labour?
National.
Well, that's a trick question.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Dogs.
One from Dan. Shark versus crocodiles. Who would win?
Shark.
Yeah, shark.
Favourite holiday spot?
Napier.
Oh. And to round us out, sweet or savoury?
Oh, savoury now.
Oh, probably savoury.
Nice.
Cheese.
Okay, so into one of the first questions. What do you think is the most important skill or attribute of a local representative? And I'll give you just 1 minute for this one. Starting with you, Mark.
So I think caring about people and curiosity to really ask people questions about where they're coming from, their lives, the businesses or the work that they do, and really develop a deep understanding. And then I think it's about being able to gather a range of people's views, the available facts and data, and form a judgment, accepting that can be difficult because not everybody agrees, and your job as a leader is to make a decision. And then I think the final one for me would be having the courage to challenge, senior leaders who maybe don't want to hear stuff, so that you can advocate to get things done for Napier.
Nice. Katie?
Cool. So my view is being approachable and connected. As a local representative, that is the job as a local MP, is to represent the views of the people. It's not my views, it's their views that matter. And so being connected to all the views of the electorate and being approachable so that people can bring their concerns. Because ultimately, my voice is the voice in Parliament, but I'm just representing theirs, and so I need to be connected and approachable.
Nice. Right. Can you tell us your party's campaign slogan and what it means to you. Katie.
Starting with me, right?
Yeah.
It's get New Zealand back on track, or if you're looking at our signs, it's get our country back on track. And look, the reason for that and what it means to me is that we all feel, and everyone I talk to feels that the country is going in the wrong direction. And so, you know, for us, it's really about getting things back in order, because, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we want to have, but you can't get any of it without getting the basics right. And so we've got to get back on that track, keep going forward, and make sure that we get the best New Zealand that we can. And so that's what that means and what it means to me.
Mark?
In it for you. So the Labour Party is and always has been about making sure that there's a safety net under people that fall, a ladder up into decent work for everybody, and creating a society where everybody, no matter what sort of family or what they inherit or what context they're born into, has the opportunity to reach their potential. And so In It For You, I think, encapsulates that really nicely.
Yeah. So obviously, regardless of who gets in, there'll be people who voted for your opponent and people who have lived really different lives from the one you have. How do you plan to represent those people? Over to you, Mark.
My turn, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So look, I went into clinical psychology because I was interested in helping people, and in that field, I dealt with all sorts, as I said before. So, people from all kinds of communities, kids that were in state care, kids that maybe had been expelled, sometimes just kids with an undiagnosed learning disability. So they had a range of families from, as I said, the very wealthy through to the very poor. And so I got used to being able to walk a mile with different families, put myself in their shoes and understand where they were coming from. In business, I think it's fair to say that not everybody in business votes Labour, and that politics actually isn't a major part of getting stuff done. So I think I've worked really well in business where we set an outcome, focus on getting the right outcome and work together to achieve it. And so I've worked with people from all different backgrounds. I have CEOs and chairs from really significant organisations across New Zealand who've refereed me when I've gone for work. So I think I can do that.
Yeah, well, look, for me, it's the thing I say to most people, especially if I knock on the door of someone that doesn't necessarily agree with my views. And that's, again, like I said, it's not the important thing. My views don't matter in this situation. It's their views, and I'm representing it. And so, honesty is most important, because if someone comes to you with issues, no matter who they supported at the election, they know that they can approach you, that they can talk to you, you're going to give them an honest answer, and you're going to represent them well. But, in terms of my background, I've done so many different things in my life. I'm only 32, but one of the things that takes me back a little bit is my time racing mini stocks at Speedway.
Oh, wow.
And so just because you may have a job when you're 32 doesn't mean you've always been in that job your whole life. You can be around other people and have different experiences, and so I think there's more behind what people see, and it just shows that you can represent anyone if you can listen to them.
Here's a curly question for you. It's a bit mean, but what issue or policy do you not agree with your party on, and why?
Oh, you're looking at me first.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I'm going to do the exact thing you don't want me to say and say there aren't any. I am a National Party member for a reason. I believe in the values, and I often say to people that this current caucus that we've got, the current team that we've got, have put together really on-point policies. And I talk to people and I say, hey, we don't have a policy out on this, but based on our values, how we'd apply that logic to the issue, this is probably what we'd come out with. And inevitably within 2 weeks, 3 months, that's the kind of policy we have. So I think they're in tune with our values. I'm deeply aligned with the National Party values, so I back everything we've put out there.
Mark?
Well, I'm an independent thinker, so I'm probably not going to be, an easier ride in the Labour caucus. The Labour Party tends to be quite a broad range of views, and we have good old debates about things. The thing that I probably would have wanted to be more progressive on was tax. I think that it's reached an unsustainable level for our economy that 311 families own as much wealth as 2.5 million people. There needs to be a way, and I appreciate the reasons why we weren't tackling that this year, but I think we need to find a way and find a cross-party consensus to tackle inequality and fair tax, really, especially for the very wealthy.
Okay.
It sounds like a wealth tax, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say, Seeing as you've brought it up, Mark, one of the curly questions that have come through is from Katie's campaign manager, actually, and she asked, if you're elected as the PM this year, would you introduce a wealth tax?
MP first?
Yeah, it's a real link, isn't it?
Yeah, your campaign man is obviously ambitious. Yeah. Yeah, would you introduce a wealth tax? Just yes or no?
No.
No.
Okay. Right. So we've obviously just experienced the devastation of the Cyclone Gabriel. Can you share with us a bit, what's your major takeaway from the disaster? Katie. Yeah.
You almost need a dice.
Yeah.
Look, do you know what? My major takeaway, and there's all sorts of things I could talk about, and I think we've got a long road to hoe, we've got a lot of work to do. But first and foremost, I think what we need to do is do a better job of empowering communities and giving them that trust and faith that they can work and work for themselves and represent themselves. Because after the cyclone, we saw communities step up really, really well and deliver for each other. They knew each other. They were, right-sized in many cases, whether it was Wairoa, whether it was Eskdale, Puketapu, to muck in and help. And I think that, as time went on, they were disempowered and we saw how that affected them. So, I think whether it's our civil defence response and structure or whether it's supporting, communities to have plans for disaster response immediately, we need to do more of that. And I think we were really in awe, and I personally was very in awe of communities that responded. So I'd like to see us do more in that space, so that we know that this kind of stuff's inevitable, whether it's an earthquake or another storm-like situation. We've just got to be able to make sure that they are empowered to stand up for themselves.
And how would you envisage that happening? What could government do to empower our communities?
Yeah, so look, I think that what we've seen in the last 6 years, and look, even more over 7-8 years, let's be honest, has been slowly looking at structuring, civil defence in a different way. And previously we have seen civil defence tied to fire services, for example, and community fire stations. And I'm not to say that that's the way to do it, but I do think we can localise it, because Eskdale had a community plan. They had an emergency management plan. And, they had plans in place, they had wardens, but it wasn't activated because over time it's been lost. People have come in and they haven't bought into that plan, or it hasn't been, kept in the front of people's minds. So I do think that, having support for community plans, and we've seen it. I know Hastings District and some of the areas, Te Puhui is a perfect example in the Napier electorate, who have a brilliant community plan. They're engaged with well and they look after themselves, and so we can build on that, and that's led by council.
And Mark, what's your major takeaway?
Well, the major takeaway for me, obviously, is that climate change is real. It's happening. I mean, we do have candidates in Napier who don't really believe in it. These sorts of events are getting more frequent, and that we need to again agree in a cross-party way to a long-term approach to resilience. We've started that process by putting $6 billion into a resilience fund. I'm not sure at last tally how much of that has been stolen to pay for the tax cuts that National's planning, most of which are going to the wealthiest New Zealanders. But I think that really, we have done some work around looking at community resilience, and I think Katie's right. I think we do need to kind of enable communities. I think even this week I saw the military taking in disaster sort of relief kits to sort of enable communities. But another key takeaway I think also was the way that not just Napier, although it did get cut off as an island, but Wairoa and a lot of our small communities got cut off. And again, we have to really look at that, and a range of infrastructure like cell phone towers that went out, and the grid being so dependent on one flood-prone space.
Cool. And how do you think that the government could help us improve our readiness and our response to disaster?
The first step would be preserve the resilience fund and spend it on resilience and adaptation instead of giving it away in tax cuts, and then start to develop a framework. And I think out of this we're going to need to, we've got two reviews going on about the response obviously, but there's going to need to be some really long-term planning. I think obviously the government set up Infracom to start doing longer-term plans, and they're going to have to weave resilience, adaptation and managed retreat and things like that into the long-term plan.
So look, I just got to add to that. It's interesting that my opposition says that we're going to take from a resilience fund. We have committed to taking everything that this government has committed to for cyclone response for Hawke's Bay, for Tairāwhiti, for Auckland, and to give that and do it faster and do it fairer. So I don't think that's a fair comment
That's
to
not
make.
the resilience fund. That's different. The resilience fund is money to build back better and things like stronger bridges and better roads.
Which is exactly what we want to do. And so just the other day I was in Wairoa and I was talking to Wairoa District Council and I took the feedback that they gave, that they get currently funding from Wakakatahi for emergency works. They can only use that funding to build back the roads and bridges to exactly how they were, which does not make us more resilient. And that is under this current government and their policies. And so I have fed back to Simeon Brown, who's our transport spokesperson, and I have said we need to change the way that emergency funding is activated. Whether the Wakakatahi give any more funding or not is irrelevant. The point is that councils need to be able to do more than just build back to what it was. They need to build in resilience, and they want to. They just are not able to.
Nice. So who do you think should be leading our adaptation? So obviously we've got different levels of our structure of government. We've got central government, local government, regional government, or regional councils, local councils. Who do you think should be leading our response to climate change and the adaptation on the ground?
Is that me this time?
Yeah.
So I would just say, with Wairoa as an example, you know, we've invested $70 million on improving the stock banks, we're lengthening their airport, so there's a whole bunch of work that is being done and being invested in. I think it's probably right that the communities that are furthest away, so Wairoa suffers from, there's central government, then there's the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and then they sort of feel at the end of the line, and pots of cash sometimes take longer to get to them. But the government has stumped up a lot of money to support Wairoa and its recovery. Hayley, what was the question?
Nice. Who should be leading it?
I think it's a complicated combination of, yes, obviously there's often local knowledge that we need to know, and I've spoken to a friend in Pakawai, and where they've finally got to, he could have probably told them at the beginning, right, when he was sitting on his roof watching the water. Banks and insurance companies have a big part to play. We don't always talk about that, but if they won't lend on a property or they won't insure it, that's a reason for retreat. Obviously, local councils at the moment are what we're trying to enable to make these decisions, but it feels like that this is so big and it might repeat that there's going to need to be some kind of national framework as well. So I think that's about getting all those different levels of leadership from government right down to local communities working together.
What I heard to clarify is led by local councils as much as possible, but with funding from central government and a bit of a framework?
The issue around funding is that whether we're a taxpayer or a ratepayer, things that need to be paid for need to be paid for. Mm-hmm. So we need to agree what it is that needs to happen, and then funding will be found. So it's either going to come out of rates. No, because it's either going to come out of rates or tax, isn't it? And
yep.
So if you've got a specific area around funding, then you can ask a specific question. But feels like we're coming to that later with local government, right? The
yep.
funding question.
Katie?
No, our view on adaptation I think is really interesting. So I always apply our values to all issues, as I alluded to earlier, and National's view is limited government. We like to set the policy, set it well, and then step back and let things be delivered locally. And so if you apply that logic to this situation, it would be a partnership approach to setting good policy and then supporting and empowering local government to deliver those plans. And look, I think that what's being done at a local level from an adaptation point of view, it is being developed well. It's had good consultation, the community is involved, and the people that are closest to the community are local government. But you need our support at the central level to make sure, A, we're not cutting you off at the knees, and B, we are giving you what you need to make sure that is deliverable. And so we don't want to go in and set policy and make acts in government that are unworkable for councils.
But within 8 days, though, we had Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, all the way down Tairāwhiti, Hawke's Bay, and all the way down to Masterton, hit by, and sometimes multiple weather events. And so if we're going to build the capability as a nation to respond to and then recover from these kinds of events, we are going to have some kind of national coordination. And if the government is going to stump up some of the funding for things like managed retreat, like it has here for the level 3 land at 50%, there has to be a sustainable plan for the whole country. So I do appreciate that there needs to be local community involvement, and there's often really important local knowledge about what's going to work best. But it's a much bigger question than a little town like Wairoa can deal with for itself.
You mentioned that whether they're taxpayers or ratepayers, it's all coming from the same people, right? Where the process we've been through, I think it'd be quite fair to say it's been a bit of an adversarial approach. It's sort of been a bit them and us between central and local government. How would you improve on that process in the future so that we're all working as one government for the people who are paying the taxes and the rates?
Implement proposal number 3 from the local government review. Is that number 3, the partnership approach? So, the timing perhaps of the arrival of the local government review is unfortunate because as we go into silly season with elections coming out in June. But one of the 5 key areas, wasn't it, was improving partnership between, and it's clear that it's broken from what the review committee said, and I think that we should definitely invest in that. They had a whole range of options that need to be investigated.
Yeah, look, and I don't believe that local government feels represented or listened to. And just a phone call I had earlier from the Mayor of Wairoa that, iwi has been given $14 million to provide cabins, temporary accommodation for people out of housing in Wairoa, yet the council has gone to the government asking for just $6 million to be underwritten so they can help people back into houses. And the move to give the $14 million was done without consulting with the local council. So I think the first thing we have to do is include regional and local councils with us, with our decision making, because ultimately if you make decisions for them without their consultation, you leave people behind. And I think that's exactly what we've seen with a lot of reform that's happened in the last 6 years.
Well, so what I've heard from people is that, because what we tried to do was do a locally led recovery with the government coming in with chunks of funding, and we couldn't work out what it was on day one, so it's been a rolling maul of additional funding. The government's been really clear though that where the funding's required, they will keep bringing more to the party. Communities haven't. Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave that point. Sorry.
Right, yeah. So you've brought
it's
up.
been a long campaign, isn't it?
Yeah. Fair enough. 8 o'clock at night. So you brought up the Future for Local Government review. So I've got a couple of quick fires on that. Should we move to a 4-year term?
Yes.
Oh, for central government?
Yeah, and local.
Yeah. Well, look, no, I've always had a slightly different view, but I think 4-year term would be good.
Should we lower the voting age to 16?
No.
Yes.
Do you want to give a why?
Look, I personally was one of those people that didn't get to vote until I was 21, and I didn't have a problem with it. I was politically engaged regardless. I helped out. I made sure that I was really well educated before I made that informed decision, and so I just don't think that there's too much harm in waiting. But it doesn't stop anyone from being interested and engaged, and I can tell you it hasn't. There are a lot of really young, engaged people, but I think there's no harm in waiting.
Well, I think the evidence is clear that the earlier, if people vote once, they vote forever. And if we could combine, good civics education with, around that period where young people will have their first votes. And also my experience is, there are people of all ages that don't engage with the political process and don't think about it. And there are some incredibly switched on 16 and 17 year olds that, really well informed.
You can still do civics education at 18 though?
No, but it's the combination, because kids learn really well when there's actually something hanging on it. And so if they know that they're going to get to vote, I think that'll be a good opportunity for them to really take it on board.
Right, we'll round out the council questions here. So do you agree with the recommendation for increased funding for councils from central government, given that what we can do is limited by the amount of rates, which is always an unpopular political decision to increase? Well,
it's unpopular for governments too, isn't it? And we get to elections, and so what happens in the local body area is stuff that's above the ground, which is why water gets neglected, gets attention from voters, and at a national level, there's always this argument about tax and what's wasteful and not wasteful spending, and so. I think what needs to happen, obviously the report needs to be processed from the local government review, is that we need to work out what is the thing that local bodies need to deliver, and then work out where the funding stream comes from. At the end of the day, it's the same people that pay for it.
I'd argue that's not the case because, ultimately you're asking ratepayers who are landholders, and then you're asking taxpayers, and that comes from all avenues. But look, my view personally, and I've talked to many of our team about this. You know, ultimately we are shifting the goalposts at the moment, this current government, on local council. And so I think the point comes is if you expect more from local government, if you're expecting them to deliver more, but you are not changing the way that their funding is delivered or given to them, then you're not leaving them with many options, and I think that's what's unfair. So I'm not going to necessarily say what we need to do in terms of how much funding comes from where, but the point is you cannot increase what you are expecting local government to do without increasing what you give them to do that with. And then you can't go ahead and say, well, actually, sorry, you haven't done it how we want it, so now we're going to take it off you.
I mean, you could argue, though, that councils have completely underfunded for several generations the investment in our infrastructure, and you see that with the 113-year-old sewer bursting in Auckland this week. You see it all the time in Wellington. We saw it in Havelock North. And so, you know, there is a really big question about how you kind of fund things, and at the end of the day, the person drinking the water is a ratepayer and a taxpayer, right?
Well, I argue that we fund them better, not take it off them.
Nice.
Well, we're not taking it off them. Oh, are we moving on to the water question?
Yeah, good segue.
I said it's my jacket's coming off.
Right, right. I think we'll move on from.
I think that's taking your microphone with it.
Uh-oh. We'll give you a minute there.
That's all right, sorry.
Right, so what we'll do is we'll flick over to healthcare, because it was another key thing that was exposed during the cyclone was our access to healthcare in Napier and in Wairoa. We ended up being little islands. I understand both your parties have announced policies around healthcare. Can you explain what that means for Hawke's Bay?
Yep, I'll start. Yep, go for it. Look, so for me, and I say this all the time, we need to have the staff before we look at the hard infrastructure, because ultimately you could have a brilliant new hospital and that's a great thing. We don't disagree, we wanted it last election, but if you don't have the staff to operate it, no, I'm just saying we wanted it last election. It's not to say we don't want it.
You didn't
but
fund
we
it, though.
We need to have.
There's no money in the pot to build it.
We need to have the people. That is what it comes down to. I was actually just talking to a constituent today who yesterday was waiting at the hospital for 6 hours before he left, and he was with another couple of people that also left because there was only one doctor on shift, and he had a heart condition that led to whatever it was that he was dealing with at the time. That's unacceptable. And so I'm sure we'd love a new hospital, but we have to address our staffing shortage first. And so our policies have been around how we increase the staff, both doctors, nurses, midwives,
which we're doing.
Then how we also, long term, address the outcomes and how we have targets to make sure we achieve those. Because at the moment we are flapping about in the wind, and if you talk to people that work in the health system, they are struggling, and they are seeing the people that are not having their services delivered to them on time and well enough.
Problem.
Well, it does, because you've got to have something to work towards. Otherwise, you are just sitting there thinking that we might be achieving it, whether it's anecdotal evidence. You've got to be accountable, and targets hold you accountable.
Resourcing, setting a clear set of outcomes, which the new health authority will do for the whole country so that health is delivered fairly, and then resourcing to what's required will help. So putting up the pay of nurses, putting up the pay of nurses by Nationals fought us all the way on health reform. So putting up the pay of nurses 60%. We've got 8,700 nurses in training in the last year. That's the most ever. More doctors, more psychologists, all in training. Not wasteful spending, but they're still training, remember. They take 6 years to train doctors and psychologists, and psychiatrists and specialists take even longer. We've got some of the most easy rules now internationally for people to get visas here if they work in the health sector. So there's no neglect around getting additional staffing in. The new hospital, we have funded it, right? So that's in our fiscal plan.
Okay. So one of the things though was actual access to healthcare. So we were an island here in Napier. We had doctors and nurses who lived in Napier.
And this was predicted.
But how do we, as a community, access that when we can't get to the hospital?
So when National shut the hospital, there was a report that they ignored that said it might not be a good idea not to have 24/7 medical services on this side of the rivers.
So what's the plan for how to improve it?
Two things. One, which we've announced already, which I think is a resilient 4-lane motorway, which can be kept open in those sorts of situations.
Look at that.
And except we funded it.
Yep,
Nationals promised and funded that road twice before, and there's been no money in the tin for it. And the other is that, you know, one of the key pledges I've made is that I'm going to advocate really firmly for 24/7 health centre here in Napier, because it was promised at the time the hospital was shut. It happened sort of briefly, but then because the Wellesley Centre is a private organisation, it's not open all night. There's no all night pharmacy, and it's not sensible in the sense that sometimes people end up having to go to A&E, even if they could have just gone to a doctor and got the medicine they needed.
So to clarify, at the moment, it's not a Labor initiative.
No, but it's something that I will advocate. Yeah, I've had conversations
Katie?
already with ministers about.
Yeah, look, so this is something I've talked to with Dr. Shane Retty, who's our health spokesperson, and I think I mentioned it the other day, but I'll say it again. We have actually talked at length. He's stayed overnight, he's worked overnight and done a shift at the Napier Medical Centre to see how it is operating. He was really shocked by the fact that there wasn't anybody overnight who could prescribe any medication. And it meant that if someone needed to go into that service, they then had to pay the next day to go to a doctor to then get a prescription. So it's not fair for people. But just going to the point about being cut off, look, yes, it does come down to infrastructure, and as I've said, we will build the 4-lane expressway as well. It's really important to us, that's vital, that's something that I'm hanging my hat on. But the big thing that a lot of people have brushed over is that in the emergency management plan for the health board at the time, is in the case of an emergency, the extra mattresses are at the Hastings Hospital. In case of an emergency, the generators are in the basement of the Hastings Hospital. In all of the cases, the emergency services and supplies were in the basement of the Hastings Hospital. That is not set up the Napier Medical Centre to be prepared in any kind of disaster. So whether it comes down to a bridge or not, or a road or not, regardless, that service and centre was not prepared. And so I think it all comes back to how we plan at a regional level, which we've lost that by reforming, a very costly reform. We have lost the local contribution, but ultimately what we haven't got is the staff to be able to operate. We cannot even operate our full Hawke's Bay Hospital. How are we going to operate a 24/7 service in Napier? And so we've got to address the staff. And we agree with that, and that's what we need to do too.
But National never raised the pay of nurses by 60% when they're in power. They never do.
We're looking forward.
Yes, we are.
So from here, Katie, just to clarify your position, National don't have any plans for a satellite hospital or anything in Napier at this stage?
So I have raised that with Dr. Shane Retty. Okay. He is absolutely aware, he thinks it's a high priority, and he believes that the way we achieve that is by bolstering up the staffing, because what we can't do is open it and then not have the staff to keep it open. Okay.
It's an example of when a service is cut, it's very, and that's a private clinic now, right? It's very difficult and very expensive to put it back. And I too have had conversations with the health minister about that. The first thing is the resilient connection to the hospital.
Right.
The second thing is that the plan was always hub and spoke services, and so to bring in smaller communities like Wairoa, it's not just Napier. The idea of a regional base hospital was always that there was going to be spoke services, and they need to be built. And what happened was successive governments left it to the health boards, and they didn't do it. And over the years, the health boards failed because they weren't funded sufficiently.
Brilliant. So that was where I was going to go. And what about Wairoa? Because it was bad enough here, but
they don't even have a GP at the moment.
Our access when we were here was basically helicopter only to get to the hospital. Yep. And we've had women who didn't have access to birthing units, a whole heap of stuff. And it was bad enough here, but it was way worse for way longer in Wairoa.
Correct.
So what's the plan for this?
So what the health authority allows is to now set a standard, because what we've done is we have just left it to areas to deal with their own area, is we can set a standard across the country for what services should be and then start to resource to it. So we've only had a national workforce plan for about 5 or 6 months, right? Because once the health authority was formed, the 20 different, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I've worked in the NHS, right? And they wouldn't think of putting less than 1 to 2 million people at a minimum in a health unit. So our 4 health authorities that sit under the overall health board means that we actually have a single health service with sensible size
units. What's that going to do for Wairoa?
Yeah.
So look,
but what it means is you can set a standard and then decide, right, in this area, we're going to say that small towns need this kind of service.
So you want to do a gap analysis?
But no, in the past we left it to 20 different health boards, pretty much the way that we've left councils to manage water.
Okay, so you can do a gap analysis, and out of that there'll be some work that comes from it, and then Wairoa will get something down the track. Katie, what are you going to do for
Right,
Wairoa?
do you know what? I have talked to people in Wairoa who are in tears, who have worked in the service, who have then needed the services as residents, who have got nothing. So every private GP has gone. There is one GP left in Wairoa who's now based up at the hospital. There is staff who are nurses doing way more than what a nurse should do. And this is what we've got to address, and this all comes down to staffing shortages. Ultimately, we need to do a couple of things. One, we need to have a working highway between Wairoa and Napier to be able to offer options to the people that live there.
And is that in National's plan?
Absolutely. We are going to upgrade State Highway 2, and I will personally be advocating for there to be a new corridor alternative to what it is at the Devil's Elbow, because that is unworkable and it'll continue to fail, and that is something I have committed to the Wairoa community. But most important thing is having a connection to the rest of Hawke's Bay for starters. Secondly, they need to have services there and they need to have options. And by continuing to take services away, this is also banks, this is dentists as well, they have no options and they need that. So ultimately, what we need to do is bolster funding to frontline services. National has committed to increasing funding to healthcare year on year, but we are prioritising frontline. Because ultimately, a ginormous reform of the health system is not the best use of taxpayer funding at this time when our frontline is hemorrhaging and areas like Wairoa are absolutely cut off. And we're continuing to fly doctors into Napier, into Wairoa, to deliver services that they should be able to access.
Well, it is actually, because we're able to remove, I think, already 300 or 400 back office managers, which National's already talking about, because you don't need 20 different departments and sets of managers across the 20 different health boards. So there's a lot of
people are walking down the hallway and they don't know who they're meant to be reporting to.
Well,
It's chaos.
Change is difficult, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't lean into doing the right thing, Katie.
Rightio, let's get aspirational. What is your vision for Wairoa?
Ooh.
You can start, Mark.
Well, it's similar to my vision for Napier, which is I want our communities, we've picked on Wairoa a lot, haven't we?
It's great.
I want our communities to be
Part of the
places where
electorate.
our kids and families can thrive, and to do that you need a thriving economy where there's good jobs at the end of it. You need the kinds of things that will bring people to want to run successful businesses in your community, and they're the same as our kids and families need, right? So you need affordable housing. Labor will continue to invest in housing. National's already announced last week that they'll stop the state house building project after the houses that we've funded.
Under Kaingaora, yes.
Yeah, well, the state house building project takes a long time to wind up every time that National switches it off. But and they're doing a really good job.
Vision for Wairoa.
But yeah, so that affordable housing, the right health services, good schools nearby. And then you create an environment where kids can thrive and succeed, and an economy where talented people want to go and live there, and set up their businesses. And there are examples of that. And I think we need to continue to support regional development. And so a bigger version of that is what I'd want for Napier as well, a place where we can all thrive.
And Katie?
Well, look, my view is it's a real shame that that's not at all what this government has delivered for Wairoa in the last 6 years. So if you walk down the main street, shops have closed. The council has had to intervene to start opening shops back up themselves to give businesses the opportunity to stay afloat. Look, ultimately, Wairoa is very dear to my heart. I love that place. It is the gateway to the East Cape. It is where things slow down. It is where everybody can be happier, and it's a brilliant place. But they're being left behind at a rate of knots. And ultimately, I do not believe that we should be investing money into Auckland's light rail project that has never got off the ground when we can't even have a connection to every community in New Zealand. And I take that to Tineroto, which is not too far from Wairoa as well. There are people that are still rafting to work. So what I want to see is a connected community that has opportunities. Because if you look at the Wairoa Young Achievers Trust, they are trying to get young people into meaningful jobs in places that they don't have to leave Wairoa. Because Wairoa is a place that people love. And there are amazing children at Wairoa College with amazing teachers who are doing a great job, but actually it's being undertaken by gangs. And that is distracting every kid from being able to achieve their best. So I want opportunities for Wairoa that don't mean that they have to leave Wairoa. And that is the very real issue that they are facing at the moment. And so ultimately, at a high level, that is what we need to get everything we do towards connecting our provinces, because ultimately they are getting left behind, whether it's infrastructure, healthcare, education, you name it, they do not get a look in, and it's not fair.
Nice. That leads nicely into one of the questions from online from Paul Eady. So how are you going to bring in better paying jobs into our region so that our people don't have to rely so much on the lower paying sectors like primary processing, hospital and tourism?
Right. So, a number of the pledges that I've made around the things that I'll be pursuing really hard if I'm elected as the MP involve the economy, right? And so the first is that, Labor has a really clear and positive future-looking vision of the economy, which accepts that the world is transitioning out of carbon and accepts that that we need to make the adaptations, and that actually, as a country and as a region, we're really well positioned to benefit from that. So one of those would be in renewable energy, and I think the recent moves on investing in supporting solar will be really good for us. I think agri-tech is another big area of opportunity for Hawke's Bay. I think we need to get in behind harnessing the best that we can do in agriculture and selling it to the world. I'm really passionate about getting together the right sorts of investment in value adding. I mean, there is a whole range of issues in our fibre and food industry. Two examples would be in wood. I think we need to find a way to support more value added processing.
And so how would the government do these things?
So I'm saying, as your local MP, and with my experience in business and ability to influence, that I will get groups of leaders together to tackle these issues.
Right, so facilitating role? No.
So yeah,
Katie?
and advocacy, and I think that I
Facilitating,
have got a track record of that, and I think that so for example,
we'll move on to Katie now. But
instead of sending logs to China and then re-importing expensive laminated beams, we should be making them here in Hawke's Bay, right?
Katie.
Cool. Well, look, for us, it's really important that we have industry. You can't have high value jobs without high value industries. And ultimately what we're doing is we're disincentivizing businesses to grow. We're making it harder for people to employ. And so there are a couple of things that we're going to do, and a number of them are in our 100-day action plan, which gives voters real confidence that we are going to get stuck in straight away and make the changes needed to help our economy grow. Because we've got a very real cost of living crisis and people just can't afford. And actually, a lot of people's incomes are increasing, but their take-home pay is not. And that is what we need to address. But I often talk about wanting Hawke's Bay to be like the Gold Coast of New Zealand. I want Hawke's Bay to have industries and jobs that make it worth coming here for, but that the people that live here have something worth staying here for. And that is what I want to see. But you cannot do that without supporting industries to grow. And so that's what we need to do, but we also need to make it easier for people to employ and grow their businesses, and at the moment they aren't.
And so what role does government play in doing that?
So look, for us, the things that we're going to do is disestablish or repeal the Fair Pay Agreement Act that is, again, really undermining.
Drive wages down.
No, look, it's not absolutely at all. What it is,
yes,
what the FPA is a industry-wide union agreement. It is taking all of the conversation away.
When Katie's finished, I'll give you some time to rebut.
It is taking all of the conversation away between the employer and the employee, and that is what the relationship is about. And what it does is it takes confidence away from businesses. They shut up shop and they move overseas because they have better conditions over there. We want our employees to have great relationships with their employers, and that's what we need to cultivate. But we are also going to remove absolutely unhelpful regulation, and a lot of that comes in the form of the RMA, which has been overcomplicated in the last 6 months by adding an extra 800 pages.
It's not about the pages.
Oh, look, every single person that has absolutely put a submission into their RMA 2.0 has said the only people that stand to benefit are lawyers. We need to make things simpler for people to grow and do better and do more. And that is what we as government do. And like I said before, our job is to set good policy, step back and let things be delivered locally and not continue to intervene and make things worse.
I'm just going to
pick up a question on that one, Katie. So reading your energy, Electrify New Zealand policy, you talked about the RMA being quite outdated, but then you talked about how you would get rid of the reforms and use the national policy statements and the national environmental standards as a way to do that, which is RMA.
In an interim.
Is the RMA.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Because it's on one hand it's outdated, and on the other hand it's that's what we're going to replace the reforms with.
Yeah, absolutely. So we said that will be temporary. So at the moment what we don't think is that 2.0 is workable at all. We think it's going to slow everything down tenfold. So what we want to do is go back to the one we had, and we want to work with that as long as we can while we work on a better option. And I can just say we have had people from across all parties who have said they will work with us to make sure that it is done right, and that's what we need to do. But just to go to our Electrify New Zealand policy, we want to double renewable energy, but it takes too long to consent
There's
a wind
plenty of
farm, for
consent.
example.
There's a whole lot of issues here I'm not getting to respond to, Hayley. Should we go back to the
Yep.
Fair Pay Act?
Yep, okay,
So-
let's go back to fair pay.
So first thing is, as a business owner, there's nothing the government that's done, apart from support my business through COVID, to stop me from growing and thriving. So I'll give you a good example of an industry.
Talk to me when you own a bus company.
Well, I'm going to talk about bus companies now.
Oh.
So, and one of the reasons that we've ended up with a real shortage of bus drivers is the tendering process and the lack of fair pay agreements. What meant that bus companies forced bus drivers' relative wages down to the point that nobody wanted to do those jobs. And you should know better than anyone that in countries where there are decent minimum wages, like ACT and National are always talking about Australia, they have better conditions for workers.
But you know what you've
Your
got?
industry took a spiral down to the lowest common denominator by not having fair pay for its workers.
Okay, right.
Government sets the procurement policy, by the way.
Rightio. So let's bring it back to you guys rather than about your policies. How much control do you think? So we've had big conversations about the cost of living crisis and the economies and recession and stuff. It's an interesting conversation, I find. How much control do you think the government actually has over the economy? Katie?
Yeah, look, I'll start happily. For me, I think it's a lot of the decisions that are made at a government level that then continue to flow into the everyday lives of Kiwis. Whether it is the business decisions, the business confidence, whether it's the amount of money that people take home, and then what that ends up in the economy as a flow-on effect, all of these things make a big difference. So absolutely, there is always social context, there's always universal international context that makes a difference. But we saw in the 2008 financial crisis how some industries thrived, some industries didn't, and how New Zealand did quite well in that. But it's all about how the government responds. And one thing that we think is really important is to not have a dual mandate in the Reserve Bank, because what it has done is taken our eye off the ball of the main point, and we have let things slip. We need to give businesses confidence so that they make more profit and give the tax back.
So the first thing that we need to get clear about the economy is that it has grown more than 8% since pre-COVID times. That all of the international rating agencies say that we've done well compared to the peer countries that we like to compare ourselves to. Our net debt's half of Australia's, and it's about a quarter of America and Britain. So actually, the debt tracking, if you look really closely in the fiscal plan of the National Party, is actually slightly higher than ours. So the economy is actually weathered the storms.
So the
but to your question about control,
how much is it more of an influence and a tinkering around the edges,
well,
or is it
it's a complicated answer. But we are a small cork floating on an international ocean. And some of the things that we need to do anyway, right, will protect us from the international. A big one is oil. Being dependent on fossil fuels, right back to the days of Carless days and the Muldoon government, our economy has always been affected by oil prices that are driven by wars in the Arabian states, or more recently Vladimir Putin.
So you're saying not influenced by...
So I'm saying that a key thing that we could do to get more control over our own economy would be to defossilise our economy, right? So to decarbonise.
Right, how much control? Is it influence or is it control?
So a related example, there could be hundreds of different areas, would be that the clean car discount has been an economic nudge that has taken the number of electric vehicles being purchased in this country from 1% to, in the last month, it's been over 30% of cars bought have been pure electric,
so
not even hybrid.
Nudging, right? This isn't. It's
no,
not
you create a context and a climate, right? If you want to have well-being in your society, you need to have a certain proportion of public housing, and switching off. It's taken 6 years to really get KO motoring on public homes. They're beautiful. Have you seen the ones in Seddon Crescent? They've got solar panels on the roof, so they not only house people.
We're right off the question now. I'm going to rein you back in.
Switching state home building
the bell,
is disgraceful. It is a disgraceful act.
We're going to move on. Right. So it's 8:29. We said this would go for about an hour. My childcare runs out pretty soon, so we'll wrap this up with a few more questions, and then I'll do a wrap up. So. A bit of a topical one around the whole co-governance and the big conversations that are going on is who we are as a nation and our identity. What do you personally think of the revitalisation of Te Reo in New Zealand?
I think it's a great thing, and people shouldn't be afraid of it or threatened by it. I understand that for some older New Zealanders that they're struggling with the pace of change, but you know, even my 81-year-old mum thinks that the new signs are easier to read.
Okay, and Katie?
Do you know what? I think we need to separate those conversations, because the thing that people are concerned about is changing things without taking people with them. What people aren't worried about is restoring and caring for a language. And I always talk about Wales, I talk about Ireland. They have worked really hard to protect and care for that language. And I think that's really important, and a lot of people agree with it. And I really personally love each year learning a little bit more and a little bit more and understanding that. But I think we've got two very different conversations at play, and we shouldn't mix the two of them.
What's the one you want to talk about then?
No, I'm just saying, no, we don't. What we don't want to do is confuse people's, conversation about co-governance, let's just say, with the care for the language, because we are losing people in the process. They are not being brought on the journey with us, and ultimately that's the feedback that we get. They want to be part of it, and they have felt left behind.
Okay.
It would be good to see you defend that more in front of the candidates that are not here tonight, because they have been dog whistling something ferocious.
How would you describe your personal relationship with tangata whenua, Mark?
Well, I whakapapa to Te Atiawa on my dad's mother's side, but I was raised in a Pākehā family, so in a European way. I get on really well with Kushla, Tangari Manuel, who's the Hiro Rafferty candidate. I even got a hug from Mecca the other day when I went to an event. I've taken the time to get to know Nathan Harrington, who runs Te Kupinga Haora, and if we had more time tonight, understanding how having an approach to Māori health will lift the boats for everyone that's struggling, and actually there could be a lot for all of us to learn from it, and that it's not a separate system.
Okay.
It's important.
Yeah, so look, for me, it's about having conversations with everybody, and I've been really well connected with tangata whenua in Hawke's Bay and beyond. We've had a lot of huis recently, and even prior to that, to talk about Māori business development, Māori economic development, and making sure that they are at the table making their decisions for what they want to see for their people. And I think that that's really important when we're talking about the treaty settlements that we've done really well, empowering those people up, because they continue to support and grow high value income jobs for Māori and grow the Māori economic development. And so that's really important, and those conversations are brilliant, and we need to continue to have them. And so I am connected with many of the iwi. I've worked in the Matariki strategy group to help influence infrastructure, and they're doing a great job there at that level, making sure that those voices are connected, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's being connected with your entire community, no matter who they are, and hearing them and being part of those conversations, and that's what I will continue to do.
Okay. Right, so...
that's good to hear, but it's been, and this is not about you personally, Katie, but it has been shameful how National has tolerated the racist dog whistling in this campaign.
Do you know what? People have got absolute free speech, and we are not going to come in and tell other parties what they should and shouldn't say. And I think that's what it comes down to. We will continue to stay on our own line of what our values are and what we believe in, and not tell other parties what they should or shouldn't do. That is democracy. You shouldn't nod and smile
behind people saying racist things in public.
I never do that.
Okay.
You shouldn't say that if that's not true.
I was going to skip this question, but this is like a personal thing for me. There's been an obvious rise in hate and abuse aimed at all of our politicians over the last 3 years. Interested in your thoughts on what's caused that, and sort of what do you think? Do you think government can influence it? And if yes, what do you think that we should be doing? And then we really do need to get to the last question.
I'll jump straight in. I think social media has been a big part of the problem. I've been at the receiving end of a lot of it. I've obviously was part of this campaign in 2020, and I've been back again this year. There's a lot of it comes down to desperation to take individuals down, because we're afraid of standing on our own messages and trusting that people will believe in that or not. And so I think that's what it comes down to. We step away from policy, which is what we should step into, and we start going for people. And that is the very wrong thing to do. But unfortunately, political parties continue to do it, and it is empowered by social media.
Yeah.
It's not just the parties, though, is it? It's the public at large.
Absolutely.
I think that there's some imported culture wars fueled exactly as Katie said by social media, and the way that social media's algorithms work, and the Christchurch Call has been looking into this in depth, right, is that it drives people to extreme, opposite views. I'm really sorry to hear if you've been getting abusive kind of content, because women and brown people and our brown women candidates in the Labour Party are experiencing terrible hatred. In one electorate in Auckland, the brown candidates' signs all got chopped up into pieces. So I think that the main parties have a responsibility to stand together and stamp out this kind of nonsense. And I do think it will be a challenge for Katie and her caucus if they do have to form a coalition with New Zealand First and ACT, because some of the things they say are outrageous.
Easy way to avoid that, just party vote National.
No, party vote Labour or Green if you don't want to have New Zealand First and ACT in government.
Yeah, and it is really serious, because the more that as a community, the more we throw hate at the people who stand up, and it takes a lot of courage to stand up and be where you're at, and the more that we throw hate at the people who stand up, it's going to be less and less likely that we get our best and our greatest minds stand up to do the job, because who wants to put themselves through that? It takes a certain kind of dedication, and so hats off to both of you. Right, so apologies to those online who haven't been able to get all of your questions. We've hopefully touched on the themes of most of them, but we're going to round this out with Ant Gowder's question. So, what is your 100-day plan specific to Napier? How do you intend to deliver on it so that you're held to account locally, not nationally? We'll start with Mark.
That's been my turn. So I have issued 6 pledges to the electorate. I think as a backbench MP or a list MP, either of us would have trouble changing the world in 100 days, but I can commit to pushing extremely hard for that 24/7 medical centre, that I will be a really strong advocate, whichever party is leading, and I'm hoping it's us, because I want to keep the public housing situation moving. We need to continue to get people out of home, motels and cars, and into public homes. I want to start a feasibility study into a biofuels plant for somewhere on the east coast, so that we can use that slash for economic benefit for our electorate and all the way up and down the coast here. And
we've only got 100 days, so it doesn't have to be too long.
Well,
And so how will you report back to us, Mark?
Well, I think that if you're an electorate MP, you're directly accountable to the electorate, right? And people will be able to see if you're working hard and making noise. And that connectivity, you've already seen me in the media having a robust debate with Air New Zealand around fares, because roads are an important part of our connectivity, but so are your flights.
So you said we'll see you. How will you report back? How will we see what you're doing?
Well, I would be a very visible and approachable local MP.
And Katie, 100-day plan.
Yes, so do you know what? We've actually put out a brilliant 100-day action plan as a whole party, and I have looked through that and thought, what is Napier going to get out of that in the first 100 days? The most important thing I think that's going to make a massive difference, obviously, is what we do in the space of education and health and infrastructure. Of course, we want to make sure that the 4-lane expressway, the upgrade to State Highway 5 and this upgrade to State Highway 2 keep moving and don't stay in the back bookcase. But the thing that I think is going to make an awesome difference is what we're going to do to tackle and address gangs in Hawke's Bay. So if people don't know, we have 2.5 gang members to every 1 police officer. That is not good enough.
At least we've got more police officers now.
Currently, how people feel is intimidated. They feel out of control of their own safety. Some of my own volunteers were personally attacked by gang members over the weekend. It is unacceptable. And so we are going to put things in place like banning gang patches, stopping them from connecting in public, and making sure that we're giving police the power to go hard on them, because it makes a massive difference to people's safety. And so that's something that we are going to make sure happens in the first 100 days. I think that is particularly important. There are a whole lot of things, but obviously my big passion is making sure we've got a connected electorate, and so of course those roading projects is big as well. But in terms of how I'm accessible and accountable, what I want to do is to continue running community clinics and connections. So I've done that a lot through my campaign. I've gone all throughout the electorate, up into the rural parts as well as locally here, and I will continue to do that, and I will make sure that those meetings are advertised, because the most important thing is that people find a way to be able to connect with you. Because if you are removed and you have 1 day a week that you're available, for example, or 2 days a week that you're available in your office, and there's a waiting list, it doesn't make it fair for people. We need to be able to have drop-ins. So that's something I'm personally really passionate about. I will continue to do that, because as I mentioned earlier, I want to be a connected and approachable MP, because it is important that I am hearing what difference our policies are making and making sure that they are working for Napier.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, obviously I'd keep the office open and have clinics, and I'd obviously continue to do the state street corner meetings that I've done over 70 of, because across the course of the cycle you have to still get out into people's communities, because not everybody comes into the office.
Okay, I think we'll bring it to a close there. Thank you so much, Mark and Katie and Mark, for sharing your time and your energy with us. As we've already alluded to, a campaign is a huge commitment with no certainty of getting the job, and which in and of itself is pretty grueling, let alone the job that you're potentially signing up to. So thank you for stepping up, and thank you for taking a part in our democracy. To the wonderful crew at Indelible, thank you so much. To Dan, Andy, Kayla and Suze, thanks for making tonight happen, and for keeping it fun and always delivering fun results. Thank you to Katie and Mark's support teams who are helping you guys get through this crazy, challenging time. As I've said, it's a big deal. Thanks to my support team and Heather, Joe and Donna for helping me out with the questions and looking after our girls so that we can be here tonight. But a huge thanks online to our audience. We hope this has been useful in helping you decide who to vote for, and hopefully inspirational and aspirational that we have some really great people who are sticking their hands up to represent our community. So voting is open now. Make sure your voice is heard. Katie and Mark, we wish you all the best over the next couple of weeks. Regardless of the results, we thank you for taking part, and we look forward to at least one of you representing us in the halls of Parliament. Noho ora mai, mā te wā, thank you and good night.